The wind off Lake Erie cut through the docks of Cleveland like shards of ice. Snow drifted in slow, silent spirals, clinging to the hulls of freighters lined up along the frozen pier. Somewhere in that gray stillness, a storm was waiting, and the lake seemed to know it. Captain James L. Lyons stood alone on the deck of his ship, the SS Argus, cigarette trembling between his fingers. He'd sailed these waters for decades, but that morning, something in the air felt wrong, too still, too quiet. "Captain," said Boatswain Miller, his voice hoarse from years of salt and smoke, "you heard what the dock hands are saying?" Lyons didn't turn. "If you're talking about the curse, I've heard it my whole life." Miller stepped closer. "They say Lake Erie doesn't let a man come back twice. Your brother. He went down out here, didn't he?" The words hit like a wave. Lyons' eyes stayed fixed on the horizon, a gray line dissolving into mist. 12 years ago, his brother's ship, the Wellington, vanished in a sudden November storm. No distress call, no survivors, only splinters of her hull washed up days later. Since then, the locals called that part of the lake the mouth, where the water swallows souls. Lyons exhaled a long breath. "The lake doesn't kill men, Miller. Pride does." That evening, the cold tightened its grip. Shards of ice drifted against the pier, tapping softly against the steel hull like ghostly fingers. Down the dock, men loaded the last of the iron ore. Thousands of tons bound for Sturgeon Bay. Inside a small harbor office, a weather clerk burst through the door, waving a telegram. "Barometers dropping fast, Captain. Heavy snow. Winds up to 50 knots. Best to delay departure." Lyons took the paper. His jaw tightened. Behind him, the shipping company's representative spoke sharply. "We can't afford another delay. You sail tonight, Captain. The Argus makes delivery by Monday. Or not at all." He hesitated, then signed the order. A single stroke of the pen, sealing the fate of every man aboard. That night, the harbor bar filled with sailors escaping the cold. The smell of whiskey and wet wool hung in the air. In the corner, an old storyteller with a beard white as sea foam spoke in a gravel voice. "They say the lake keeps what it takes." In '99, a coal ship went down near Point O'Bark. Some nights, when the wind's just right, you can hear their voices under the ice, singing. At a nearby table, young Eli Turner, barely 20 and the youngest aboard the Argus, swallowed hard. "Do you believe that, sir?" The old man's eyes gleamed. "Doesn't matter what I believe, boy. What matters is, the lake believes in you." From the shadows, Captain Lyons listened in silence. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he did believe the lake was alive, ancient, watchful, remembering. It had moods, tempers, and a hunger that men like him never truly understood. The next morning, November 9th, 1913, dawn never came. The world woke in gray. Snow fell in whispering sheets, covering the dock like ash from a dying fire. At precisely 7:30 a.m., SS Argus prepared to sail. The ship's horn bellowed across the harbor, deep, mournful, final. On the shore, families waved through the haze, their shapes fading into the curtain of snow. Lyons gripped the wheel. 14 men stood ready, his crew, his brothers. 2 days, men, he said, steady and calm. 48 hours, and we'll be home. Home, Eli whispered, smiling faintly. As the Argus cut through the ice, the city vanished behind them. All that remained was white, endless and silent. High above the lake, clouds gathered like a wall. The first gusts of the white hurricane began to scream across the Great Lakes, a storm unlike anything the world had ever seen. Within 72 hours, it would destroy 19 ships and claim over 250 lives. And among them was the SS Argus, already vanishing into the blizzard. The first winds struck before dawn. At first, they were nothing more than restless whispers sliding across the frozen lake, but within hours, they became a roar that shook the steel bones of the SS Argus. Snow swept across the deck in violent spirals. The sky vanished into white. For the men aboard, it felt like sailing inside a cloud of knives. Captain James Lyons gripped the wheel as the ship groaned under the force of the storm. Waves rose like moving mountains, their peaks breaking into foam that froze the instant it touched metal. Every gust came screaming from the northwest, the killer wind that sailors of the Great Lakes feared most. "Wind's shifting again, Captain," shouted Boatswain Miller, his beard coated with frost. "Keep her steady," Lyons yelled back, voice barely audible over the howl. "Trim the cargo hatch, and tell the men to lash down the lifeboats." The air burned with cold. Salt water and snow fused into a single, blinding storm. The Argus, 525 feet of iron and steam, began to shudder as waves hammered her broadside. Eli Turner, the youngest on board, fought his way up the ladder, clutching a coil of frozen rope. He was drenched, half-blinded, but his eyes still held that raw, foolish courage of youth. "Sir," he gasped, "the port hatch is taking water." Lyons turned. A wall of white slammed across the deck, knocking Eli to his knees. The captain reached out, hauling him up with one hand. "As long as we can still hear the storm," Lyons shouted, "we're still alive." But the storm wasn't just heard. It was felt. The lake itself seemed to rise and fall beneath them like a living thing, breathing fury from its depths. By noon, visibility dropped to 0. The compass spun aimlessly, its needle drunk on magnetic chaos. Ice began to crawl across the rigging, forming grotesque shapes. Frozen ropes, rails, even men's coats stiff as armor. Inside the wheelhouse, the temperature was dropping fast. Frost bloomed across the windows, swallowing the outside world. Lyons wiped the glass with his sleeve and saw nothing, just the blank white of oblivion. "Barometer's falling, sir," Miller shouted. Lyons looked at the gauge. The needle sank lower and lower. A grim certainty filled his chest. The lake was awake now. He reached for the telegraph, tapping a message meant for the nearest port. "White hurricane hitting. Visibility 0. Holding course." But static answered back, nothing but the crackling growl of dead air. The wireless was gone. Hours blurred together. Daylight and night meant nothing. The storm had turned the world into one endless twilight. Gray, violent, eternal. Eli stumbled into the galley where a few crewmen huddled around a flickering lantern. "What if we turn back?" one of them muttered. "We can't," another replied. "The ice behind us will close the channel. We'd be trapped." Eli looked toward the ceiling, feeling the vibration of the waves pounding above. He whispered, "Feels like the lake's trying to tear us apart." Miller glanced at him, eyes hard. "Don't talk like that, boy. The lake hears things." The lantern flickered again, then went out. Only the sound of wind and groaning steel remained. By midnight, the Argus was no longer sailing. She was enduring. Each wave struck with the force of an explosion. The deck tilted until men slid across it, clawing for handholds. Railings bent like soft wire. Lyons forced his way to the bridge, hands bleeding from the cold. The storm outside looked like another world. Sky and water fused into one violent mass. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw something in the distance. A black shape, another ship fighting the same battle. A flare burst briefly through the snow, then vanished. He couldn't tell if it was real or just the lake playing tricks. "Signal them," Lyons barked, but the radio operator shook his head helplessly. "Nothing, sir. The air's dead." Sometime after 2 a.m., the steering gear jammed. The Argus turned broadside to the waves, the worst possible position. The next impact was catastrophic. The hull screamed. The deck split with a deep, wrenching sound that echoed through every man's bones. The storm had found its rhythm, and the Argus was dancing to it. "Pump the bilge! Get below!" Lyons roared, but his words were swallowed by wind. The crew scrambled in every direction. Some to the holds, some to the pumps, but the ice had sealed everything shut. Eli clung to the railing, eyes wide. "Captain, she's breaking apart." Lyons grabbed him by the shoulders. No, son, not yet. But she's not while I'm still breathing. He pushed the boy toward the engine room, then turned back toward the bridge, where lightning flashed across the lake, illuminating the horror around them. The entire surface of Erie was alive, black water exploding into white peaks 1,000 feet high, smashing, folding, roaring. For one moment, there was silence. Then, a sound like the world tearing open. The Argus twisted violently. The hull groaned, cracked, and split clean in two. Men screamed. Metal shrieked. The stern rose into the air before vanishing into the dark, boiling water. Lyons felt the deck collapse beneath him. Freezing water surged around his legs, dragging him toward the edge. He clung to a broken ladder, his breath turning to ice. Through the chaos, he saw Eli, clutching a lifeline, eyes terrified but still alive. Lyons shouted over the storm, "If you make it out, tell them, we fought to the last." And then the lake took him. The world went white. The morning of November 9th, 1913, rose like no morning should. There was no dawn, only a dim, bruised sky choked with ash-gray clouds that seemed to crush the horizon. The wind howled from the northwest, shrieking through the rigging like a living thing. Every wave towered like a frozen mountain, white-capped and merciless, slamming into the SS Argus with the force of a train. Inside the bridge, Captain James "Jim" Corcoran gripped the wheel until his knuckles turned bone white. His eyes, sharp, sea-gray, flicked to the barometer. It had dropped again. Fast. "Pressure's still falling," muttered First Mate Daniels, his voice trembling. Corcoran didn't answer. He just stared ahead into the blizzard where sky and water had fused into one swirling void. Below deck, the crew fought to keep the cargo holds sealed. Water leaked through every seam, freezing as it touched steel. The Argus groaned under the strain, every bolt and rivet screaming in protest. Somewhere deep within the ship, the sound of splitting metal echoed, long, drawn out like a dying animal. The storm had no mercy. At 10:15 a.m., the gale reached hurricane strength. Snow whipped sideways, turning the world into a white abyss. Visibility dropped to zero. Men had to crawl on hands and knees just to move across the deck. The compass spun uselessly. The ship's direction lost to madness. Daniels shouted above the roar, "Captain, we're drifting south by west." Corcoran's jaw tightened. He knew what that meant. They were heading toward the center of the storm, toward the very heart of the white hurricane. He turned to his men. "Hold her steady. Keep her bow north. God help us if she broaches." Lightning flared, then a sound like thunder mixed with the snapping of iron. A wave the size of a building smashed over the bow, swallowing the forward deck. Two sailors vanished instantly, dragged into the ice-cold oblivion. The ship lurched violently, water rushing down the hatches. The Argus was no longer fighting the storm. It was being consumed by it. "Pump room's flooded," someone screamed from below. "Seal it," Daniels yelled back, but it was useless. The sea was already inside. Corcoran's eyes burned from the salt and cold. For a moment, he thought of his wife back in Cleveland. Her last words to him. "Dante chased ghosts on the lakes, Jim." He smiled bitterly. Maybe she'd been right. The ship rose on another massive swell, climbing a mountain of black water. Then it fell. The impact was catastrophic. Cargo shifted, the hull shuddered, and a loud crack echoed through the bridge. The Argus had begun to break. Men screamed. The deck tilted. The world turned sideways. Corcoran grabbed the wheel, shouting, "All hands to the lifeboats, now!" But no one could hear him. The storm had swallowed his voice whole. On deck, lifeboats dangled like toys, torn away before they could be lowered. One sailor, young Henry Lowe, no more than 20, tried to cling to a rail as the sea washed over him. He saw the captain on the bridge, standing firm against the chaos, refusing to abandon ship. Their eyes met for a single instant, a look that said everything. We are not leaving her. Then came the final blow. A wall of water, 30 feet high, crashed over the Argus, bending her spine. The steel hull split amidships with a sound that could be heard even above the wind, a sharp, tearing scream. The stern and bow lifted apart, groaning in agony as the lake swallowed her whole. "God, she's breaking!" Daniels cried. Corcoran didn't move. He whispered something. No one could hear what. Then the bridge windows shattered inward and the lake claimed him too. For a few seconds only the storm existed, howling, roaring, erasing every trace of man and machine. The Argus was gone. Hours later, the snow began to settle. Pieces of wreckage drifted across the lake, broken timbers, life belts, a single crate marked Argus. The storm still raged, but its voice was quieter now, as if exhausted by its own fury. From the shoreline near Point O'Bark, a lighthouse keeper named Samuel Grant watched through his telescope. He could see nothing, only white mist and churning waves. But deep inside, he felt it. The storm had taken another ship. He wrote in his logbook that night, "Winds unholy, waves beyond imagination. The lake groans with the dead." What Samuel didn't know was that SS Argus wasn't alone. That same storm, the White Hurricane, would claim 12 ships across the Great Lakes before it was done. More than 250 men would vanish beneath the waves. But the Argus, hers would be the story most whispered about. Because even after the lake calmed, fishermen swore they saw her silhouette, half submerged, moving silently through the mist. A ghost of steel, still searching for her captain. When the storm finally broke, it left behind a silence so deep it felt unnatural. For 2 days, the snow kept falling, soft, endless, and indifferent. The Great Lakes lay still, their fury spent, but beneath the frozen surface, something ancient stirred. In the small harbor town of Alpena, Michigan, the docks were lined with anxious faces, wives, mothers, children, all waiting for ships that would never come. They clutched telegrams and old photographs, whispering prayers into scarves. Among them stood Eleanor Corcoran, wrapped in her husband's coat. The smell of salt and tobacco still clung to it. She refused to believe the Argus was gone. "The lake doesn't keep what it loves," she told the harbor master. "Jim will come home." But the man only lowered his gaze. He had seen too many widows say the same words. For days, search crews combed the shoreline. Wreckage began washing up. A section of the wheelhouse, a shattered lifeboat, a logbook half soaked in brine. But no bodies, no answers. The SS Argus had simply vanished, swallowed whole by Lake Huron. Then came the stories. Fishermen out of Presque Isle began reporting strange lights flickering beneath the water on calm nights, like lanterns drifting deep below the ice. One man swore he heard a foghorn echo when there was no fog. Another claimed a ghostly shape, long and skeletal, moved silently under the surface just beyond the reach of moonlight. The newspapers called it superstition. But for the families of the lost, it was something else. Hope. In the spring of 1914, when the thaw came, a small salvage team was sent out to locate the wreck. Their leader, Thomas Avery, was a diver known for his calm under pressure, a man who had spent half his life chasing ghosts at sea. He had been aboard the Howard M. Hanna during the same storm and had survived by pure chance. Now, haunted by guilt, he felt drawn to the Argus, as if the lake itself demanded he return. "Find her," Eleanor had whispered before he left. "Bring me something of Jim's." The expedition began under gray skies. Avery's crew dropped weighted lines and scanning buoys, but the lake floor was a maze, cold, dark, and treacherous. Visibility was less than 6 feet. Every sound echoed like a whisper from another world. On the 3rd day, their sonar caught something, a metallic shape resting upright 250 feet below. Too intact to be debris, too symmetrical to be rock. It was her. The dive that followed would become legend. The water was black as ink, so cold it burned. Avery's breath filled his helmet with frost. His lantern pierced the dark in narrow cones of gold, revealing the ghost of a ship sleeping in eternal silence. The SS Argus lay there, split in two, her name still faintly visible across the bow. As he drifted closer, he saw the bridge. Windows shattered, controls rusted to bone. Then something moved. A shape, pale and slow, glided past the glass. Avery froze. His pulse thundered in his ears. He thought it was another diver, but the comms were silent. His entire team was still above. He aimed his lantern toward the movement. Nothing. Only the faint reflection of his own light, and a single gloved hand pressed against the inside of the window. Avery staggered back, bubbles rushing from his regulator. He blinked, and it was gone. When he returned to the surface, he said nothing at first, but later, sitting by the fire that night, his hands still trembling, he told the engineer quietly, "She's not empty down there. Something's still waiting." The official report listed the Argus wreck at coordinates 44 degrees, 82 static dune. Final depth, 270 feet. Cause of sinking, structural failure during hurricane conditions. Unrecoverable. But the local legends refused to die. Lighthouse keepers along the Huron shore said that every November 9th, when the wind howled just right, you could hear a ship's whistle echoing through the storm. 3 long blasts, 1 short, the Argus calling for home. And sometimes, on nights of clear ice, divers claimed to see the faint glow of lanterns beneath the surface, drifting endlessly along the lake bed. Eleanor never remarried. She kept her husband's coat by the door for the rest of her life, in case he came back. When she died in 1952, the locals said the night she passed, the foghorns on Lake Huron sounded without cause, just once, and then fell silent. Decades later, technology brought the past back to light. In 1975, an underwater survey team rediscovered the wreck. Cameras descended through the icy black water, capturing haunting images of the Argus resting upright as if still sailing. Her wheel was still in place, and behind it, something that shouldn't have been there. A figure, human-shaped, preserved by the cold, its hands locked around the helm. "Captain's still at his post," the diver whispered over the comms. But when they replayed the footage later, the figure was gone. Lake Huron keeps its secrets well. Some say the ghost of the Argus still roams those waters, appearing to ships in the fog, guiding them away from the same fate. Others believe it's a warning, a reminder that the Great Lakes are not to be tamed. And every November, when the snow begins to fall and the wind moans across the ice, the people of Alpena light lanterns on the pier for the lost souls of 1913. The light flickers across the water like small suns, trying to reach something deep below. Maybe, just maybe, the lake remembers. Maybe the dead are listening. The year was 2025. Over a century had passed since the SS Argus vanished into the fury of Lake Huron. Yet the legend still haunted every diver who set foot in those waters. Dr. Amelia Carter, an oceanographer and documentarian, had spent her career chasing shipwrecks that blurred the line between fact and myth. When she received a grant from the Great Lakes Research Institute, she knew exactly where to go. To her, it wasn't just another wreck, it was a story that refused to die. The reports of strange lights beneath the ice, of a phantom captain, still steering his vessel through the dark, had lingered for generations. And for a storyteller like Amelia, the truth, whatever it was, waited below. The expedition launched on a cold November morning. Her research vessel, Endeavour II, cut through a sea of fog, retracing the exact coordinates recorded in 1975. The air smelled of metal and snow. The waves lapped softly as if the lake itself were holding its breath. "Sonar contact 268 feet," the technician called out. The screen pulsed with a faint outline, the Argus still upright, frozen in time. As the submersible descended, Amelia felt her pulse quicken. Through the viewport, the light faded to blue, then black. Particles of ice drifted like dust in a cathedral. The deeper they went, the quieter everything became, until only the hum of the thrusters and her own breathing filled the void. Then, out of the dark, the shape appeared. Her hull loomed like the bones of a sleeping giant, covered in silt and frost. The ship's name, barely visible, was still etched on her bow. Amelia's voice trembled through the comms. "She's beautiful, and she's waiting." They maneuvered closer. The submersible S lights revealed the bridge, the same place where Captain Corcoran had stood over a century ago. But something was off. The window glass, once shattered, now seemed whole, intact. Inside, shadows moved, too slow and deliberate to be tricks of light. "Wait, did you see that?" her assistant gasped. Amelia leaned forward. Through the frost on the glass, she saw it. A faint silhouette, a man in uniform, standing at the helm. He turned his head slightly, as if aware of being watched. And then the ship's whistle sounded. 3 long blasts, 1 short. Amelia's heart stopped. There's no way. That system's been dead for 100 years. Static filled the comms. The submersible lights flickered. For a moment, the entire lake seemed to pulse with energy. Readings went haywire. "Power surge, instruments spiking," her engineer shouted. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. In that abyss, Amelia heard something. A voice carried by the water, distant yet unmistakable. "Hold her steady. Keep her bow north." It was calm, commanding. A voice that sounded exactly like Captain Corcoran's last recorded entry in the Argus logbook. Then the lights snapped back on. The silhouette was gone. But something new appeared on the camera feed, etched into the frost on the inside of the window clear as day. When the Endeavour II surfaced, the world above seemed different, quieter, almost reverent. The crew stood in silence as the snow began to fall, soft and heavy, like it had on that terrible day in 1913. Amelia stared at the horizon. Maybe the storm hadn't just taken lives, it had taken memories. And maybe, just maybe, the lake had been holding them ever since. Later, in her final report, she wrote, "The wreck of the SS Argus is not just a story of loss. It is proof that the past never truly disappears. The lake remembers, and through it, so do we." Months later, her footage premiered at an international maritime history symposium. The final shot showed the Argus, silent in her watery tomb. But as the camera pulled back, faint lights appeared around the wreck, small orbs drifting like lanterns through the dark. And just before the screen faded to black, a ghostly sound echoed one last time. The distant call of a ship, a whistle across the Great Lakes. 3 long, 1 short, the Argus still sails. Every November, when the first snow falls on Lake Huron, divers and locals gather at the shore. They light lanterns and set them adrift across the black water, each one a memory, a name, a promise. The lanterns glow faintly, their reflections shimmering like souls beneath the surface. Sometimes, on calm nights, if the wind is just right, those who listen closely swear they can hear it again. The whisper of the storm, the echo of a captain's voice, and the heartbeat of a lake that refuses to forget. Because some stories are not meant to end. They are meant to echo.